Are you tired of constantly trying to prove yourself to others? Exhausted from bending, explaining, performing, just to be accepted, just to be enough? Maybe it's time to stop. Because real success doesn't come from pleasing the world. It comes from mastering yourself. From learning to hold your ground quietly, without shouting. From choosing your peace over their approval. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. So why do we keep giving that power away? Why do we let other people's opinions control how we feel, how we show up, how we live? The truth is simple but uncomfortable. The moment you stop handing over your emotional keys to the world, you start unlocking your real strength. 1. Calmness is a skill you can train. High-impact English version. Calmness isn't weakness. It's power, disciplined, intentional, unshakable power. When the world is chaotic, when noise surrounds you, the pressure of work, the weight of expectations, the sting of criticism, the pull of competition, calmness becomes your weapon. Not your escape. Your armor. Let this sink in. Calmness is not a gift. It's a skill. And skills can be trained. No man is born with perfect composure. No one wakes up naturally stoic in a world designed to trigger rage, anxiety, and self-doubt. Calmness is not something you stumble upon, it's something you earn by confronting your own mind. It's the daily choice to rise above impulses. To own your reaction. To pause, even when the world demands a fight. Because true strength is not in how loudly you speak, it's in how well you stay silent when provoked. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, warrior, philosopher, put it best. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This isn't poetry. This is strategy for men who wake up every day and fight invisible battles. Calmness is not passivity. It's control. While others explode in frustration, you breathe. While they argue to be heard, you stand in stillness. While the world reacts, you respond. With intention. Because you mastered the one thing that no one else can touch. Yourself. Here's the truth. You can't control what other people do, but you can always control your response. You can't change the past, but you can choose not to live in it. You can't stop the storm, but you can learn how to steer the ship. Every time you choose calm over chaos, you're sharpening a weapon more dangerous than any anger. Self-command. Imagine this. Every morning, before the world grabs you, you sit. You breathe. You remind yourself, my thoughts are mine. My reactions are mine. Nothing outside of me has power unless I allow it. Sounds simple? It is. But simple does not mean easy. And that's why very few men ever master it. But those who do, they become unshakable. Start right now. Stop blaming. Life isn't fair. It's not supposed to be. But your response? That's your power. Train daily. Take 10 minutes to be silent. No distractions. Just you and your thoughts. Observe, don't react. Remember this every time you're angry, triggered, or under pressure. My emotions are not commands. I don't have to obey them. I choose how I respond. The calmest man in the room is always the most dangerous. Not because he has no fire, but because he knows exactly when to light it. In a world full of noise, be the silence that speaks volumes. Train your calm like a muscle, because when others lose themselves, you'll be the one they follow. Ready for the next CTA in this tone? Or want a deep cinematic voiceover script for Reels, TikTok, or Shorts with sound design suggestions? Let me know and I'll jump right in. 2. Master your mind before it masters you. And once you begin to understand the strength of calm, you'll realize something even deeper. Your mind is either your greatest ally or your most dangerous enemy. You see, calmness is the doorway, but the room you step into is even more powerful. Self-mastery. And self-mastery starts where most men refuse to look, inside their own thoughts. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't learn to control your mind, it will control you. And it won't do it with kindness. It will run wild, feeding you fear, anger, anxiety, and insecurity until you're reacting to life like a puppet on strings. Every emotion that hijacks you. Every impulsive decision you regret. Every moment you lash out, withdraw, procrastinate, overthink, self-sabotage. They don't come from the world. They come from the way your mind interprets the world. This is not philosophy. This is neurology. And if you want to be a man who builds, leads, and inspires, you can't be a slave to a mind you never trained. Epictetus, another Stoic master, once said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Let that hit you for a moment. It's not the traffic jam. Not the criticism. Not the rejection. Not the bill. Not the breakup. It's the meaning you assign to it. That's what stabs deepest. That's what burns longest. A man cuts himself open more often with his own thoughts than the words or actions of others. And until you take control of those thoughts, not suppress them, not avoid them, but command them, you will always live in reaction, not in power. So ask yourself, do you want to keep being someone that life happens to? Or do you want to become the kind of man that life responds to? Here's the process, and it's not glamorous, but it's sacred. When you feel anger rising, observe it. Don't feed it. When doubt creeps in, don't wrestle with it. Watch it. Understand it. When fear whispers worst-case scenarios, meet it with reason, not resistance. That space, that tiny pause between stimulus and reaction, is where you reclaim your freedom. You're not weak because you feel. You're human. But you become powerful the moment you realize. You don't have to act on every feeling. You don't owe your emotions the keys to your behavior. You owe yourself discipline. You owe yourself control. You owe yourself ownership of your own mind, because no one else will do that work for you. And here's what most never understand. The world doesn't break you. Your untrained mind does. That snide comment that ruined your day? It had no power. Until you gave it meaning. That argument that derailed your week? It only lasted 10 minutes, the rest of it was your mind replaying it on loop. That failure that crushed your confidence? It was just a lesson, until you turned it into an identity. This is why mastering your mind is not a hobby. It's a mission. A daily battle. And you win not by force, but by awareness. By watching your mind like a disciplined warrior, not a passive observer. By catching the lie before it becomes a belief. By noticing the emotion before it becomes a reaction. By owning your internal world so deeply that nothing external can shake it. Because the moment you can sit still with a turbulent mind and not get swept away, that's the moment the game changes. That's when you stop being ruled and start leading. 3. Separate emotion from reaction. And once you begin to reclaim your mind, once you recognize that your thoughts are not commands, that emotions are not chains, you step into the next challenge. Learning to separate emotion from reaction. Because even with awareness, even with discipline, you will still feel. You're not a robot. You're not supposed to be. You'll still feel anger when disrespected. You'll still feel fear when things get uncertain. You'll still feel hurt when people betray you. But the difference now is this. You don't let those emotions drive the wheel. This is where most men fall. They think feeling an emotion means they must react. That being angry means they must lash out. That being afraid means they must run or shut down. That being sad means they must retreat or explode. But the truth is brutal in its simplicity. An emotion is just a signal, not a strategy. You see, Pain is natural. But lashing out? That's a choice. Fear is natural. But paralysis? That's a choice. Disappointment is natural. But self-destruction? That's a choice. And in that split second, between the emotion you feel and the action you choose, your character is forged. A trained man knows this. It's not the emotion that defines him, but the response. So the question isn't, what do I feel? The question is, what does this feeling require of me right now? Because just like you wouldn't let a drunk stranger drive your car, you don't hand over your decisions to an unfiltered emotion. You take a breath. You create space. You let the wave pass. And then, only then, you choose your move with clarity. This is not repression. This is not being a tough guy who hides everything. This is not bottling it up until you explode. This is emotional discipline. This is mature masculinity. This is what separates boys from men. This is what allows you to walk into chaos and still lead. To hear disrespect and not spiral. To face fear and still step forward. To feel rage and choose peace anyway. Because here's the truth that no one ever taught you. You don't have to attend every emotional argument your mind invites you to. You don't have to fire back just because you're triggered. You don't have to prove your strength with noise. Real strength is measured in restraint. In silence. In the moment you could lose control, but don't. Think about the last time you let anger speak for you. Did it solve the problem, or just create new ones? Think about the last time you acted on fear. Did it protect you, or keep you small? How many times have you wished you could take back the words, the actions, the reactions you gave? Not because they weren't justified in the moment, but because they didn't reflect the man you want to be. That's the lesson. Emotions are real, but they are not the truth. They pass. They fade. But what stays? The way you respond. And if you can learn to feel without surrendering, to experience without exploding, to hurt without harming, then you've earned something that no one can take from you. Power. Internal power. Quiet, unshakable power. From now on, remember this. A feeling is not a command. A thought is not an obligation. A trigger is not a justification. You are the one behind the wheel. And every time you choose presence over impulse, you become more than just a man who survives. You become a man who leads. Respond, don't react. Once you've built the strength to feel without being controlled, once you've learned to sit in the storm of your own emotion and not be swept away, you are ready for the next level of mastery. The art of response over reaction. Because emotion is only one part of the equation. Pressure is the other. You can be calm at rest. But what about when life shoves you? When someone cuts you off in traffic? When your partner pushes your buttons? When your boss undermines you? When a stranger disrespects you in public? That's when your training is tested. Not when things are easy, but when the temperature rises. When your ego is provoked. When your impulse to strike, defend, or dominate screams for control. That's when you find out whether you're a man reacting from habit, or a man responding with intention. And here's the brutal truth. Reactions are easy. They're cheap. A quick insult. A passive-aggressive tone. A slammed door. You don't need strength for that. You just need a wounded ego. But a response? A response takes patience, control, wisdom, power. Because to respond is to pause, to breathe, to evaluate what you want to create instead of what you want to destroy. The Stoics knew this. They knew that in every moment of tension, you are presented with a choice. To add fire or to hold the line. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to carry the fire without burning everything down. Let's be real. You're not in control of how the world acts. You can't control rude drivers, insecure managers, immature friends. You can't control the chaos of the marketplace, the criticism of the internet, or the disrespect of strangers. But you can always control this: how you show up in response. And that is where your power lives. Not in your ability to overpower others, but in your ability to overpower the lesser version of yourself. There's a moment in every confrontation that defines your leadership. The split second where your body wants to explode, but your mind says, wait. If you can catch that moment, if you can widen the space between trigger and action, you become the calm in the chaos, the grounded one in the storm, the man others look to even when they don't admit it. Because that level of presence is magnetic. It's rare. And in a world that glorifies speed and volume, stillness is intimidating. Clarity is commanding. So the next time someone tests you, don't prove your strength by raising your voice. Prove it by lowering your reaction. Don't prove your worth by winning an argument. Prove it by not needing to win at all. Don't prove your dominance by overpowering. Prove your composure by holding center, no matter what pulls at you. Think of the most powerful men in history. Not the loudest, not the most explosive, but the ones who could lead with a sentence or with silence. They weren't reactive. They were deliberate. They weren't emotional puppets. They were composed strategists. They didn't need to shout. They spoke when it mattered. And when they did, people listened. So from now on, when life provokes you, don't be surprised. Be prepared. Let that moment be your signal, your cue to rise above instinct. To lead instead of lash out. To respond instead of react. Because in doing so, you don't just change the outcome of the moment. You transform who you are becoming. And that's the mission, isn't it? Not to be the man who always has a comeback, but the man who no longer needs one. Because he already knows exactly where he stands. 5. Life is not fair. Adapt anyway. Once you've trained yourself to respond instead of react, once you've learned to step into chaos without losing your center, you come face to face with a truth most people spend their lives avoiding. Life is not fair. And it never will be. But here's what separates the average man from the exceptional one. The average man resents that truth. The exceptional man uses it. Because deep down, you already know. You've seen it. You've watched people who don't work as hard as you get ahead. You felt the sting of doing the right thing, only to be overlooked. You've sacrificed, showed up, stayed silent, fought through pain, and still didn't get the outcome you deserved. You felt that rage, quiet, bitter, suffocating. That sense that the game is rigged. And maybe it is. But what if that's not a problem? What if that's the point? What if the real test isn't how well you do when everything is fair, but how disciplined you can remain when it isn't? Because anyone can be composed when the path is clear. But can you stay locked in when life throws punches below the belt? Can you move forward when you've been hit harder than you expected, harder than you earned? That's what separates men who break from men who build. You see, unfairness is not a malfunction of life. It is the design. Not to punish you, but to shape you. Because when life denies you what you've earned, that's when it gives you something more valuable. The chance to become the kind of man who keeps going anyway. Every injustice you faced, every betrayal, every setback, every door slammed shut. You can let it break you. Or you can let it build your endurance. Your humility. Your hunger. This is your edge. Because when others fall apart because things didn't go their way, you keep showing up. You keep adapting. Not because it's easy, but because you've stopped waiting for fair and started focusing on what you can do now. Stoic wisdom doesn't promise fairness. It promises something better. freedom from needing it. The moment you stop demanding that life play by your rules and start building strength for the life you've actually been given, you step into a kind of power no one can give you and no one can take away. You become the man who doesn't fold when the world is unjust. You become the man who keeps his code, even when the system doesn't reward it. You become the man who others follow, not because he wins every time, but because he never lets the loss define him. Here's what to remember. You are not owed anything. Not comfort. Not applause. Not justice. But you are capable of enduring anything. And from that place, you stop being a victim and start becoming a weapon. The world doesn't need more men who cry foul at every turn. It needs more men who rise in spite of it all. Men who can face failure, betrayal, loss, and rejection. And keep walking. Keep building. Keep showing up with honor, clarity, and control. Because when life is unfair, and you keep going anyway, you become dangerous in the best way possible. A man who is no longer waiting for perfect conditions to become his highest self. You just get there. Through the mud. Through the noise. Through the storm. You adapt. You evolve. You lead. 6. Anger is not strength. And once you stop waiting for fairness, once you learn to adapt without complaint, you begin to notice another challenge rising from within. Anger. Quiet. Heavy. Constant. It doesn't always come in shouting matches or broken glass. Sometimes it sits in your chest like a pressure you can't name. Sometimes it speaks through silence, through clenched jaws, through the way you pull away from the world. And for most men, for too many men, anger becomes the mask they wear when the world doesn't listen, doesn't reward, doesn't respect. They think it makes them strong. They think the louder they get, the more powerful they are. They confuse volume with value, fury with force, and reaction with dominance. But here's the truth that will divide who you are today from who you have the potential to become. Anger is not strength. Control is. The most dangerous man in any room is not the one who explodes. It's the one who doesn't need to. The man who feels the fire and doesn't fan it. The man who can face insult, ignorance, and opposition, and still remain rooted in clarity, not chaos. That man commands a room without raising his voice. Because people feel the presence of someone who has nothing to prove, and everything under control. You see, anyone can yell. Anyone can slam a door. Anyone can bark threats and pound their chest and let their emotions run the show. That's not power. That's lack of discipline wearing a mask made of rage. Real power? It's quieter, sharper, more deliberate. It's the ability to feel anger and choose not to let it speak for you. Not because you're scared, but because you refuse to let something temporary destroy what you're building permanently. And here's what they never taught us as men. You don't become less of a man by staying calm. You become more of one. Because anger doesn't require strength. Restraint does. Every time you don't respond to disrespect with fury, you sharpen your edge. Every time you choose silence over shouting, you grow deeper roots. Every time you walk away from a fight that would only feed your ego, you walk closer to the kind of man your future needs you to be. This isn't passivity. This isn't submission. This is war, and the battlefield is within. And when you win that battle, when you stop letting anger hijack your dignity, you become dangerous in a new way. Not because you're unpredictable, but because you're unshakable. So the next time anger rises, and it will, pause. Ask yourself, is this helping me become the man I said I would be? Or is this just another excuse to lose control? Because the more you master this, the more you realize silence is not weakness. It's a weapon. and the man who doesn't react the way the world expects. That's the man people remember. You don't need to raise your voice to raise your value. You don't need to explode to prove you're not to be crossed. Your calm is your clarity. Your restraint is your strength. And your silence, when chosen, is often the loudest answer in the room. Next, we'll dive into a principle that's often forgotten in the noise of arguments, debates, and emotional flare-ups, the untouchable power of staying calm in the heat of conflict, and how that stillness doesn't just protect you, it earns respect from those who never expected it. 7. Calm in conflict will earn you respect. Once you've seen through the lie that anger makes you powerful, once you've tasted the strength in silence, the dominance in restraint, you begin to notice something strange happening in the world around you. People start to pay attention. Not because you shouted, not because you demanded it, but because you stood there, still, grounded, unshaken, while everyone else lost their grip. That is the moment you understand I'll almost never learn. Respect is not seized through noise. It's earned through presence. In conflict, most people escalate. They get louder, meaner, more frantic. Their ego is bleeding, and they want you to bleed with them. They throw chaos at you like gasoline, hoping you'll strike the match. And when you don't flinch, don't fold, don't feed the fire, they feel it. That unsettling calm. That weight. That edge. Because your stillness exposes their storm. It's a paradox, but it's true. The more composed you are under pressure, the more power you command. Because people don't follow the man who's the loudest in the room. They follow the man who doesn't need to shout to make an impact. Who stays centered when others lose their heads. Who listens more than he speaks. Who thinks twice, then speaks once, if at all. This kind of calm isn't weakness. It's earned. It's trained. It's the result of dozens of unseen battles you've fought inside yourself. And won. It's the product of choosing clarity over impulse, again and again. Until your presence becomes a kind of leadership. Not the kind you force. The kind people feel. Think of the leaders you respect most. The mentors. The generals. The fathers. The warriors. They weren't reactive. They weren't quick to anger. They didn't panic when things fell apart. They were composed, even when chaos surrounded them. And because of that, others found their center in their presence. That's the man you're becoming. A man who doesn't need to dominate to be respected. A man who lets his calm do the talking. So the next time tension rises, when someone tries to draw you into drama, into noise, into reactivity, ask yourself, what would the man I'm becoming do right now? Would he retaliate to feel powerful? Or would he remain centered and let the moment pass through him like wind over stone? Because stone doesn't move. And neither do you. Here's what few understand. The loudest one in the room is rarely the strongest. The most aggressive one is rarely the most respected. The one who loses control the fastest is always the one with the least of it. But the one who keeps his cool, who stands firm, speaks with precision, and never needs to prove himself, that man earns something more valuable than validation. He earns respect. And not the kind that comes from fear. The kind that comes from presence. From watching someone so sure of himself, he makes others question their own chaos. So let the world shout. Let others panic. You stay still. Stay thoughtful. Stay untouchable. Because calm under pressure isn't just a virtue. It's a message. And every man around you is listening. Next, we'll step into one of the hardest shifts in modern masculinity, the courage to stop explaining yourself to people who are not equipped to understand you, and how detachment from constant validation unlocks the door to true freedom. 8. Stop explaining yourself to everyone. And once you've seen how calmness draws respect more than chaos ever could, once you've stood your ground in conflict, not to win, but to remain unshaken, you begin to understand something deeper. You don't need to explain yourself. Not to everyone. Not anymore. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't need to argue your perspective. You don't need to narrate your every decision to people who are not even qualified to judge them. Because at some point, a man outgrows the need to be understood by everyone. Not because he's arrogant, but because he's finally aligned with something more powerful than approval, his own principles. Here's the hard truth. The more you grow, the more misunderstood you'll be. The clearer you get, the more you'll be questioned. The quieter you become, the louder the world will demand your explanation. And if you're not careful, you'll spend more energy proving yourself than building yourself. But real growth requires distance. Real power demands selectivity. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your process. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your reasoning. Some people ask why. Not to understand, but to challenge, to doubt, to reduce you to something small enough for them to feel safe again. And when you try to explain yourself to those people, you do something dangerous. You shrink. You water yourself down. You start editing your purpose so it fits inside someone else's comfort zone. And that's where greatness goes to die. So here's what a man must learn if he wants to walk his own path. Your choices don't need universal applause. They need personal alignment. You're not here to convince everyone. You're here to become someone. And not everyone can come with you. Not everyone should. Let them misunderstand. Let them assume. Let them talk. Because the longer you try to explain yourself to people who don't see your vision, the longer you delay the building of that vision. And that's the subtle trap. You start chasing clarity from people who live in confusion. You start asking direction from people who've never left where they were born, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You start needing permission to be who you already are. Enough. You don't owe everyone your process. You don't owe everyone your plan. You don't owe anyone your why, unless they've shown they can carry it with the same weight you do. And if they haven't, let them go. Not with malice. Not with anger. But with calm. Because you no longer need to be seen to know you're walking the right path. You no longer need to be understood to understand yourself. This is the turning point. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop leaking energy. You stop arguing with ghosts. You stop asking for validation that can't carry the weight of your mission. And in that silence, you hear something louder than approval ever was. Clarity. You start to move with conviction. You start to build with focus. You start to lead with presence without having to explain your every move to the crowd. Because leadership doesn't need explanation. It needs execution. And not everyone is meant to understand the man you're becoming. They weren't there for the pain. They weren't there for the nights you questioned everything. They weren't there when you stood alone and chose integrity over acceptance. So no, they don't get to shape your direction now. Let your silence speak. Let your actions tell the story. Let your results do the explaining. And walk forward, not to be understood, but because you finally understand yourself. 9. Be selective with who you share your struggles with. And once you stop explaining yourself to people who were never meant to understand you, you start realizing something even deeper. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. You've already paid the price of over-explaining. Now it's time to protect something even more valuable. Your struggles. Your doubts. Your pain. Because vulnerability, when placed in the wrong hands, doesn't create connection. It creates leverage. It becomes gossip. It becomes misunderstanding. It becomes ammunition. And the next thing you know, your most sacred truths are being passed around like cheap opinions by people who never earned the right to hear them in the first place. Here's the truth. Your pain is not public property. Your struggle is not for mass consumption. In a world obsessed with exposure, In a culture where relatable is more marketable than resilient, there's something rare and powerful about a man who doesn't bleed in front of everyone. Not because he's hiding, but because he's discerning. Real strength isn't in sharing everything. It's in knowing what to share, when to share it, and with whom. Because what you carry inside you, your story, your struggle, your shadows, that's sacred ground. Not everyone should walk on it. And not everyone will know how to walk gently when they do. Some people listen just enough to judge. Some smile just enough to manipulate. Some nod just enough to pretend they care. And if you're not intentional, you'll start mistaking their interest for safety. You'll open up and walk away emptier than before. Not because vulnerability is weakness, but because you gave it to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. This is why the strongest men are selective, not guarded. Selective. They don't wear a mask, but they do wear armor. And they don't take it off for just anyone. They know that where you share your struggle is just as important as why you share it. Because some people don't offer comfort. They offer control. And the more of yourself you give to the wrong person, the more power you lose. So here's the shift. Share your truth with people who can hold it with care. Speak your doubt only to those who have earned your trust. Offer your struggle only to those who are willing to help carry it, not criticize it. The rest? Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them make up their own stories if they must. Because the people who matter, the real ones, they'll never need a performance. They'll never ask you to prove your pain. They'll sit with you in silence, and that'll be enough. Remember this. Not everyone has the emotional depth to hold what you carry. Not everyone has the stability to witness your instability. Not everyone has the heart to meet your vulnerability with strength. That's not a failure of yours. It's a filter. A gift in disguise. So be kind. Be open. But be wise. Don't confuse availability with loyalty. Don't mistake interest for integrity. Don't trade your truth for temporary validation. The most powerful man in the room is often the one who listens more than he speaks, feels more than he shows, and shares only when the room has earned his trust. 10. True intelligence is a cold mind in a hot situation. After everything. After the silence, the restraint, the calm, the detachment. There's still one test that exposes every man for who he really is. How do you think when the pressure's real? When stakes are high, eyes are on you, and there's no script to follow. Do you lead? Or do you lose yourself? Because all the discipline in the world, all the wisdom, all the training, means nothing if your mind collapses when things get hard. That's the final level. The place where most men fold, where few rise. Can you keep a cold mind when everything around you is on fire? See, it's easy to sound wise when things are calm. It's easy to talk about stoicism, about strength, about control. When no one's pressing your buttons. When your reputation isn't on the line. When life isn't punching you in the mouth. But that's not where greatness lives. Greatness shows up in heat. In the meeting that goes off the rails. In the relationship that suddenly implodes. In the moment the deal falls through. When the plan breaks. When betrayal hits. When pressure peaks. That's where your intelligence is tested. Not by what you know, but by what you do with what you know. When everything's moving too fast. Because intelligence isn't just knowing the answer. It's knowing how to stay still long enough to find it, while everyone else is panicking. That kind of mental control? It doesn't shout. It doesn't show off. It doesn't need to. Because it's the quiet force that changes the course of outcomes, without ever raising its voice. When others react, you strategize. When others rush, you breathe. When others collapse, you assess. Not because you're emotionless, but because you've trained yourself not to drown in temporary waves. This is what makes a man truly dangerous. He doesn't just survive chaos. He thinks clearly inside it. So how do you build that? You stop indulging in urgency that isn't real. You stop needing to respond before you're ready. You stop mistaking reaction for responsibility. And instead, you take the beat. You zoom out. You let emotion pass, and when the dust settles, you make the move that actually matters. Because real power isn't fast. Real power is precise. This is why the most intelligent men aren't always the loudest. They're not always the most charismatic. They don't always dominate the spotlight. But when it counts, when the heat is on, they don't blink. They don't rush. They don't break. They simply do what needs to be done. Because their mind has already been where most men fear to go. And that's where this entire journey has led you. From reacting to reflecting. From proving to embodying. From needing to be seen to simply being unshakable. A cold mind. In a hot world. Still. Sharp. Unmoved. So the next time life gets loud, you don't. You think. You breathe. You respond. Because you are no longer here to survive pressure. You are here to perform under it. To lead inside of it. To rise above it. Not with emotion, but with precision. Not with noise, but with presence. Because true intelligence is the man who remains cool when the world burns and still chooses the right move. Pause. Just for a moment. Step back from the noise. Turn away from the pressure. And look inward where the real battle is being fought. Because the truth is, mastery of the outer world begins with mastery of the inner one. And no man will ever be truly free until he learns to lead himself first. You don't need to scream to prove your success. You don't need to justify your worth to be respected. You don't need to be seen to be powerful. Success isn't found in noise. It's found in presence. In discipline. In how you carry yourself when no one's watching. So start there. Start with the calm. Start with the silence. And build from the inside out. Because the world doesn't need more men who chase everything. It needs more men who own themselves. Follow now for deeper mindset strategies drawn from timeless stoic wisdom. And rise, not just above the chaos, but above the version of yourself you've outgrown.